I hope you're having a great summer. We've had a great summer so far. Of course, school is on the horizon. We're looking at it there, and we're eking out the last few days of holidays. We had this past week at the church a vacation Bible school. The theme was Trust in the Lord. And wanted to give a shout out to Christina Ballard and Natalie Javadi and their fearless band of youth leaders. I heard such enthusiastic comments from the moms as they were leaving, saying their kids had enjoyed it and loved it so much. One mom told me that her young boy wasn't convinced that was where he wanted to go on the Monday, but he went and enjoyed it. And by Friday, he said to his mom, he's coming back for next week's Vacation Bible School. There isn't one next week. And I see we have Matthew in our congregation this morning. He is like our OG of VBS helpers. Thank you, Matthew. We have a wonderful story in our gospel reading this morning. It's the conclusion of chapter 14. Now, chapter 13 was the conclusion of part 1. And now when we come to 14, it's like part 2 of Matthew. Matthew 13 had 7 parables of Jesus. And you probably remember some of them, but all the great parables all clustered together in chapter 13. Matthew 14, beginning the next section of Matthew's gospel, we have 3 stories in this chapter. The first story is the violent execution of John the Baptist. The next story is the miraculous feeding of the 5,000, and today's story is about Jesus walking on the water. I wanted to give a shout out to Mother Hilden, who preached last week. She was really good about helping us to remember we need to put these stories in context. So the story of the miraculous feeding last week started with Jesus withdrawing to be alone. And why he was withdrawing was because John the Baptist, who was his cousin, his friend, his herald, had been killed. Today's gospel story begins with Jesus again withdrawing to a place by himself. This time not because of his grief at the loss of a friend, but probably because he is just depleted from his ministry to the people and feeding the 5,000. Took its toll on his strength and his energy, and he sends the disciples. Would you turn with me in your bulletin to the gospel passage? You'll notice at the very end of our liturgy in the bulletin, it says, please take home the bulletin for spiritual reflection this week. So you might want to bring a pen and you can circle. There might be a word that jumps out to you and you could circle it, take it home, ask God to tell you more about why you noticed that word. So verse 22 to 24, first little section, we have a storm. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time, the boat, battered by the waves, was far from land, for the wind was against them. Are any boaters in our congregation? Anybody been on a sailboat, powerboat, canoe? They can be tricky things. If you don't know how to swim, they can be a little scary. So my mom and dad went on a cruise years ago, and it got into quite a bad storm. My dad was in the Navy, had been in the Navy. My mom worked on the Great Lakes ships as a waitress. So they were both used to storms, and they were afraid. But my mom was a woman of faith. She was quite, okay, if this is it, this is it. But my dad, who was not a Christian, is like panicking. It's like, So it can be scary. I went to see The Odyssey, this movie, which is all filmed in IMAX. And it had great scenes of the boat out on the Aegean Sea, sometimes in waves and storms. The boat that the disciples in then was battered by the waves, and the disciples are struggling, probably rowing, trying their best to get to their destination. But despite their best efforts, in the end, they're not successful. Now, the Sea of Galilee is not that big. It's not like the Aegean Sea where Odysseus was. It's somewhere between Lake Livingston and Lake Conroe. So it could have, you'd think it should have been quite possible to get there, but they were thwarted. They were rowing hard. Does anyone remember in the World Cup when the Norwegian fans were pretending they were rowing with their team? I was going to make you all do that today, but I won't. So they're frustrated, wondering why has Jesus sent them into the midst of this storm. So verse 25, 27, Jesus comes to them. Early in the morning, maybe 4 a.m. He comes walking toward them on the lake from the east. But when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost." And they cried out with fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it's I. Don't be afraid." What a scene that must have been. I always imagine Jesus, when I hear him walking on the water, I think of a completely calm pond and Jesus just strolling along. But when you think, how did Jesus come to them with the waves that are coming up? These storms come up quite suddenly. So the waves are coming. The wind and rain are lashing the boat. It's probably impossible to see clearly. The first shards of the early dawn are casting her eerie light from the east, and exhaustion and dissension, disagreement, and all of a sudden they seem to know that there's something on the horizon, something coming towards them, an apparition of some sort that did not bode well. The fear of the waves is displaced by the fear of this apparition. They were terrified and they gave a name to their deepest fear. It's a ghost. Their fears are calmed when Jesus says, "Take heart, it is I. Don't be afraid." There's a scene in C.S. Lewis's book, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. When the ship on their explorations, they come to a part of the sea where it's dark. They're a little bit anxious about going in, and they hear a scream of this victim and he's warning them, "Don't come in here, turn back." He climbs on the boat and he tells them that in this spot, this is where their worst nightmares become real. Each individual nightmare will become real for them, and the crew is paralyzed by terror. They turn around, still in terror, until Lucy's the greatest character in the Narnia. Lucy says, she prays to Aslan, and Aslan whispers to her, "Courage, dear heart," and then they come out. Look, if you will, at the psalm reading, just back a page. Look at the verse first of the psalm. It's lovely. It fits in so nicely. "I will listen to what the Lord is saying, for he is speaking peace to his faithful people and to those who turn their hearts to him." Turn their hearts to him. We move on then to verse 28, and I don't really understand these next three verses. I'm going to have a talk with Father Bates after the service. What was Peter thinking? What's his idea? Peter says, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you in the water." Does he not know it's Jesus? And if it's not Jesus, is he going to go out to him on the waves? So Jesus says, "Come on." So Peter gets up, he begins to sink. When he notices the strong wind, he becomes frightened, and he cries out, "Lord, save me." Someone said this should be the cry of every follower of Jesus, knowing that our God is a God who shows up, who comes to us, who's present when we can't see him, who is there and can save, and he knows we will get in trouble. He knows we will face challenges that we can't conquer on our own, and he wants us to cry out, "Lord, save us." And so Peter's fear is, again, it was fear of the waves, then of the ghost, now it's fear of the waves again, and he forgets who Jesus is. Verse 32, when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. I was thinking of entitling my sermon this morning, "Whatever Floats Your Boat?" ? This is not the first time the disciples had been in a boat in a storm. Back in Matthew chapter 8, there was a storm, but at that time Jesus was with them in the boat. He was actually sleeping. They had to wake him up. And he tells the waves, "Peace, be still." This time he's not in the boat. Now he comes to them in the storm. Would Jesus come to you in your storm? Jesus has sent you to do something. I hope you feel that Jesus is sending you out, that it has a purpose and a mission for you, something that maybe that you don't want to do, that causes you some anxiety or frustration, fearing you won't be good enough. Maybe it's forgiving someone, mending a broken relationship, facing financial difficulties, sharing the good news in some positive way, bringing hope to our world, bringing light to the darkness. And in the process, you might feel like the disciples, that everything is against you. It's a tough culture to speak about God and to find to express joy in him. It may take a while when you begin to step out and have an impact. It may take a while. Can I read you a note? This is a true story. This week we're getting ready for school. And they were doing a deep clean. And behind one of the electrical outlets, they came across a note written by a sixth grade boy in the year 2004. And it said, "Jim, whoever receives this message, know that you are already starting a good life as an explorer. For you to even think of looking under a set of plugs takes a great imagination." That note has brought such encouragement. I remember Sam Scully very well, and he went on to a brilliant career. In Romans, so talking about being sent, Romans, if you look just back in verse 13, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. But how are they to call on one in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in one they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim? And how are they to proclaim unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news." What is it that Jesus wants you to do for him? Do you have room in your boat for Jesus? As he showed his disciples in the boat on the Sea of Galilee that early morning, he is there with us always, even when we can't see him. And he can save us when we turn to him and our heart leans in and calls out to him. But do you want Jesus in your boat? Jesus dismissed his disciples, but did not abandon them. He's getting ready for them to do ministry when he's not there with them. He came in their moment of distress and frustration. What causes you to have faith in your soul, to be attentive to his call? What gives you a perspective of hope in this world that is often lacking in hope? When Jesus got into the boat, the wind sank. The great truth is that wherever Jesus is, the wild storm can be calmed. There's another St. Francis de Sales, 500 years after St. Francis of Assisi, was a Catholic bishop in Geneva who was noted for his kindness. And in his district, he was noticing on this farm a farm girl walking across the farmyard to get her bucket of water. She pumped the pail brim full of water, but before she carried it, she put a piece of wood into the water. And he was flabbergasted. And so one day he went to her and he said, "Why do you do that?" And she looked at him with surprise and answered as if it were a matter of course, "Well, to keep the water from spilling, to keep it steady." And Francis wrote to a friend later and said, "When life is at its hardest, distressed and agitated, put the cross in the center of your heart to keep it steady. And every time the storm and stress come, the presence of Jesus and the love that flows from his cross, the wooden cross, will bring you peace." Our gospel reading ends with the beautiful picture of Jesus and Peter climbing into the boat, the wind ceasing, and the disciples looking at Jesus, knowing who he is, they worship him. "Truly you are the Son of God." They worshiped him. One of the greatest definitions of worship ever laid down was spoken by Archbishop William Temple. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury during the Second World War. And he said, "Worship is the submission of all our nature to God. It is the quickening of the conscience by his holiness, the nourishment of mind by his truth, the purifying of imagination by his beauty, the opening of the heart to his love, the surrender of our will to his purpose. All this gathered up in adoration, the most selfless emotion of which nature is capable." We have come, haven't we, to worship this morning. Like the disciples in the boat, we will experience storm and opposition. We will struggle against wind and waves, but we will remember that Jesus comes to us. He takes the initiative. He always comes. When we gather around his table in a moment, and when we break bread together, we remember Jesus and worship him. I love telling the kids, I pray with them before games, and I say to them, How you play the game is an act of worship just as much as singing a song in church. Our life is an act of worship. And in a few minutes, we will be dismissed. It says in the bulletin, the dismissal. You will be dismissed. Send us out to do the work you have given us to do. And we will face storm, but we are confident that Jesus will be with us in the storms. Take heart, dear ones.